Steve Kaye, who you will hear presenting part one of this podcast. His views are entirely his own, and they do not reflect or endorse any of the other views expressed in the rest of the podcast. Hi friends and patrons, welcome to this exclusive bonus material that I make available first to my patrons and then will no doubt appear as some bonus episodes between seasons on the Bible Project Daily podcast. And today has been one that's been a little bit longer in the preparation than most, and I've given it the rather scary title, AI, the Rise of the Machines, Should We Be Afraid? As you know, I attend various groups midweek where I listen, learn, sometimes get the opportunity to speak. And one of the things I attended this week was a philosophy study group where one of the members addressed us on the issue of AI. The guy involved was a guy called Steve Kaye, who has a computer science background. Just a little bit of a bio of him, because this bonus episode is going to be in 4 parts. The first episode is going to be Steve and his presentation as part 1. I'm calling the computer science, the prophecy. And bear in mind that not all prophecies are necessarily good. And I'm going to pretty much play a recording of what he said at the group that evening. And it's just a little over 20 minutes long. This is a guy who comes from a computer science background, a technical background. What he has to say is very, very interesting and informative. And in a sense, the next 3 sections of the talk are going to be, in some respect, my response to it, but also some ideas I've been thinking around AI for quite a while now. So he's going to present the computer science perspective, and I'm going to respond to that. Part 2 then of today's talk is going to be, well, I'm taking different perspectives each time. Part 2 I've called the Philosopher and the Parable of the Rise of the Machines. Then part 3 I've called the Artist and the Creative Response. And then finally, part 4 I've called the Theologian, and that's subtitled Who Defines Personhood. But first of all, listen to what Steve has to say. The sound quality isn't great because it was literally recorded with an iPhone sitting in the table beside where he was talking. But I do think you'll find what he has to say interesting. Let me give you a very quick bio of the chap who's speaking so you know where he's coming from. He initially served as an apprentice working on radio and as a television engineer. After that, he went into the field of industrial electronics, and he's had in his life over 50 years experience in the information technology industry. He's had various roles, starting out at a very young age as a hardware engineer, machine code assembler, technical manager, then went on to work for companies including Apollo, Silicon Graphics, Hewlett Packard. But over the last 20 years before his retirement a few years ago, he started and ran 3 different companies utilizing optical recognition systems, and then moved into cloud partnering with Google. During that time, he partnered with IBM, and he in fact was IBM's Global Partner of the Year. Towards the end of his career, he provided independent consultancy back into IBM and was the main IBM partner board member for Europe. He successfully cashed out of his businesses, a company that was called Cloud Technology Solutions, which is now the largest cloud company in Europe. After which he basically retired but did some mentoring for technology startups. So you can see he comes from a well-walked path when it comes to computer science and has I feel, quite an in-depth yet nuanced understanding of artificial intelligence and what it means. I do believe that people approach artificial intelligence and what the potential and the risks of it are very much depending on the background they come from. The computer scientist will approach it, in my estimation, differently from someone from a neurobiological background. But all of that hopefully shall be paid out for you to get a handle on this as we progress through these 4 sections. So it's going to be a long episode. I do hope you find it helpful, and we'll drop in and start off with Steve's presentation on artificial intelligence. I'll see you in a moment.
It's quite funny listening to people, you know, even in Japan, it's like, they just refer to things being AI'd, like a verb. My car's being AI'd. I've paid 1,000 yen more for my car because it's AI'd. I said, what do you mean? And she means it's got parking sensors, right. GPS. So it's been attributed to all sorts of things. It's that thing that you get quite often in technology where everybody gets overexcited, overwhelmed, and it's just been a little notch forward. The reason I picked this subject is that it's not a notch forward. So just to give you my stance, this goes down with the printing press, the invention of fire, agriculture, and all those things. And you're going to see a range of people, and I suspect we have that in this room, from Luddite to absolute panic, we're all doomed. The truth is going to be somewhere in the middle. But there is a real worry, and it's why I'm putting a book together on it, because the questions that we languidly pose ourselves, and I'm quite happy to have them unanswered right up until grave time, need to be addressed. Even if we get it wrong, they need to be addressed, because this stuff will overtake, and we'll be playing catch up all the time. The bad actors will take over. All sorts of things can go horribly, horribly wrong. Basically, every bad decision, you can imagine Putin on steroids. You know, it's amplified to a logarithmic factor if it goes wrong. Right. There's even a term now in artificial intelligence circles where machines hallucinate. So, you know, if I tell you a book, or I tell you I know something about something, and you, within 2 questions as a human being, you probably realise I don't, or I do, and you'll react accordingly. These things can give you the wrong answer and make it sound incredibly plausible. You know, so there are all sorts of threats. The industry itself, I mean, the people at the top, the people who made this move a step function forward and why it's become urgent all of a sudden, most of those people that develop this stuff, and I'm talking about thought leaders like the guy who's referred to as the godfather of AI, which happily came out of Cambridge and not out of California. He worked for Google until one day he'd set a little test up to get a robotic arm to look for a yellow tennis ball in a box. And he had an array of these things. So he was experimenting with neural networks, which is a posh term for lots of processors, lots of CPUs. Set this thing to look for a yellow tennis ball in a box of mixed coloured balls. Went for a coffee, came back, and there were 100 machines doing it. That wasn't programmed in. Right. And it frightened the life out of him. So he's set up a new university called the University of Singularity. It's a spin-off from Stanford. But all the people that did all the original design and the transformations, most of them are now occupying themselves with the human aspects of this. And they're actually talking to the bigger companies, the early successful companies like OpenAI, Google, and all that, and asking them to slow down development, which I've never heard of. And because of the way we're set up as a society, thinking about Wall Street and quarterly results and all the rest of it, they ain't going to do that, are they? They're going to want to move fast. There is a threat straight away. Oh, Jeff Henshaw, he's kind of informally referred to. I think he's at Toronto at the moment. But all the guys who started OpenAI, which is ChatGPT, which everybody's kind of heard of now, they were his PhD students, and he was the first to put together a neural network of sorts at Cambridge. Rudimentary stuff, but it's the basis of it all. And he's worried. So, you know, he's worried, I'm worried. But that's the downside. So it's like a careful march towards something completely new. There's some that believe that as early as 3 years from now, there will be a system somewhere that is more intelligent than human intelligence. So that sparks up all sorts of philosophical and ethical concerns. So what I've done is I've just put together that little slide set here to really keep us out of the technology mire and looking at pretty much the same. A lot of this stuff's going to ring true. You know, Steve's focus on free will and all the rest of it. I can give you my take on it, but it isn't the take. You know, I don't believe a machine can ever have free will unless, as long as you have to program it, it can't have free will. But then that throws out things like, well, okay, if it does some damage, who's responsible? Is it the machine, or is it the people who programmed it, or what, you know? And as I said, these things, if they do accidentally or intently damage humanity or fabric, it'll do so at an exponential scale compared to what a single individual can do. So it's serious crap, really. Quick thing on this Venn diagram, a quick definition of what it currently looks like. It's been around a long time, this stuff. Some would argue, you know, Descartes and people like that, Leibniz, but they were talking about artificial machines that thought. There's Alan Turing, of course. You know, he invented the Turing test, which is still relevant today as to what is intelligence, and therefore can we measure whether this thing's intelligent or not. Just very recently, the people who put ChatGPT together, ChatGPT-4, it is showing signs, and that video you sent was really good.
Yeah.
The third one, where, you know, one of the execs, we're both techies, one of the execs was saying it's got a level of conscience. It can actually do this mind and thought thing.
It worked out theory of mind,
yeah,
allegedly,
yeah,
GPT-4.
yeah. And the author of the video put, at the end of it all, put the question back to the machine and said, I'm looking at, you know, this theory of mind, and I want to know if you've got a conscience. And it came back with some astonishing answers. Astonishing answers. It worked out for a start off that, well, you were asking me if I've got a conscience, so I think I have, but I'm not sure.
Right.
It's moving at an alarming rate. But this little Venn diagram should show you where it's all come from. Started with machine learning, even as far back as the 70s, 80s. I was selling machines to finance houses to do just this, where you've got a defined set of data. You're not interested in any other data. In this case, it was finance data, and they were setting it routines to come up with decisions on behalf of banks, basically. Things like credit checking and stuff like that. So that was in late 80s. I was flogging machines to do that. Then it kind of died a death. It got seen as some sort of research plaything for a while, and then suddenly, in the early 2000s, it got serious. And you get these happenstances, particularly in IT, where somebody does something over here, something happens over here, and somebody does that juxtaposition, and all of a sudden you've got a brand new toy, and it's a similar thing. So there's some coming together of technologies. There's control of machines, there is virtual reality and augmentation, and it's no surprise that the biggest winner at the moment is actually a graphics chip supplier called NVIDIA. Yeah. So their marketplace has been games and stuff like that. But I know those guys, I worked for them at Silicon Graphics. When Silicon Graphics wound up, they all wandered across the corridor, so to speak, and started developing game chips. Demonstrating or visualizing data, creating vectors is a really difficult thing to do. So you need massively parallel CPUs. That's why game cards are so expensive, because it's more powerful than the actual CPU itself, and there's usually 10 or 12 of them working in parallel to give you that image that you see these days. And as it turns out, it's exactly the same problem when creating neural net. All a neural network, by the way, is extrapolating. You might have 1,000 physical CPUs, central processors, and the technology has been around to virtualize. So you have one CPU in your machine. There's technology around that makes you think that you've got 10. It's a software layer on top. So you've got 1,000 physical CPUs, or even 1,000,000 physical CPUs. Applying the same virtual technology could effectively give you 10 million. But you need that order of power to manipulate unbelievable amounts of data that these things work on and train themselves on. So you start off with, picking yellow tennis balls out of a box. We saw early examples of this in manufacturing, robotics, that kind of thing. It's an example of machine learning. Somebody's gone in there, some subject matter expert's gone in there, told this machine what you want it to do, and it's gone ahead and do it. Of course, the obvious advantage to that is that it will do it without getting tired or coming hungover or whatever. It'll just keep doing it till you tell it to stop. Chess was another example. I think in the 90s, IBM chucked a lot of money at their supercomputer to become the world champion chess player. A game of chess, the machine today is nothing. It's just nothing. So the whole thing is about machine learning. The medical industry use machine learning a lot now, particularly in sensitive areas like operations around the spine, where a machine is far more accurate than a consultant's hand to dissect or do whatever. Stay away from your central core and your spine. Deep learning is the stuff that's getting all the news. So it's the same technology, slightly different programming techniques, but deep learning is about massive amounts of data. And what people don't understand is there's already massive amounts of data. Right, so every emotion you've ever put online, everything about you is there, it's available. So there are issues around data protection and all sorts of things. I mean, we're still grappling with it in a medical sense, but I don't think we should be, but the problem is if that data gets in the wrong hands for the wrong reasons, blah, blah, blah. So are the safeguards in place to protect, all that sort of stuff.
Didn't one of these outfits ask for NHS data?
Yeah, and it's been given it.
And it was given it, yeah.
Well, they're the same people that kind of rescued us with COVID because NHS couldn't do IT. They were just writing checks for gazillions to these nefarious consulting companies that were basically accountants doing computing. It's been a government thing in the UK for a long time. And the Yanks came in and bailed us out in terms of controlling COVID injections and making sure who's had a jab and who's due a next one and all that sort of stuff. It sounds simple, but when you apply it to 70 million people,
that's the point.
It's complicated. But AI was at the very centre of the Genome Project. So, the Genome Project, it was kind of, after 20 years, it was 2% done. And after a further 2 years, it was 90% done. So it's that kind of logarithmic movement. So the analogy I was going to draw tonight was, if you take somebody from 1550, the year 1550, and transport them to the year 1750, you're not going to see a massive amount of difference over 200 years. If you take that same person and move him into this century, it'd probably kill him. Right? Silver objects in the sky, people talking to people face to face, 3,000 miles away, all those things. We're really good at, as a species, at adopting without understanding. And that's fine if you're talking about mobile phones and internet and stuff like that. It's not fine when it comes to this. Everybody's got to have an amount of knowledge in order to understand what's being done to them and what they're about to do to others. So I'm not going to go through all this, but I'm trying to give you, generative AI is worth mentioning as well. So that's causing the stink at the moment around patents and reputations and all the rest of it. Generative AI, in its basic form, will take anything and convert it to anything else. So if you want to see the Ayatollah on a surfboard in California, then you can create a very plausible video and his voice to represent that now. So if you think about the world of entertainment, you'll be maybe not us, but the next generation maybe will determine what they're watching. So that it'll be interactive. We've moved slowly from the radio to the TV, to the computer screen, to the gaming screen. We'll be going into augmentation, virtual reality, so we'll be interacting properly. And to all intents and purposes, we wouldn't notice the difference. So generative AI, for me anyway, is that. It's text in, text out, or text in, picture out, text in, video out, video in, text out. Again, thinking about education, it's absolutely huge. And it's worth like going into the sort of job marketplace as well, because that's usually the first reaction. Shit, you know, my job. And it's amazing once you take the clappers off. Everywhere you look, I mean, I was parked up on this cruise ship a week ago in this massive dockyard in Japan, and there's something like 100 cranes, you know, the big cranes that are lifting the containers on and off. And I'm looking at the guy operating and thinking, you need to start looking for another job, because that's a perfect example of machines taking that over and doing it far more effectively. But in terms of what I call professional jobs, I think it's a great thing. I think it's going to remove a lot of the crap that people have to deal with in their daily lives and allow them to become creative. The problem with that is that it'll show up those that are going through the motions against those that really understand and love what they do. Teaching's a ready-made example of that. The people who are going to make most money out of this thing aren't programmers, because programming is going away. It's people who can ask the right questions, it's the prompters. So if you're really good at what you do, you'll know what questions to ask to get the returns that you need. And that applies to every discipline, including things like theology, teaching, medicine, all those things. So if we do it right, you know, we'll be the creative body. This will be the thing that does everything else. That's what I think is the future, as long as everybody's involved. That's my other main worry. The people with money, you know, Elon Musk, I'm not being critical of him, I just think it doesn't represent the broad consensus of the population, or the culture, or whatever you want. It's got anything. And it shouldn't be left to the lords of Silicon Valley. Certainly not US politicians. Again, it's like this, for me it's clarifying everything. So like international relations, you think, well, what's actually going on here? You know, are the Arabs talking to the Israelis? Are the Ukrainians talking to the Russians? You just don't know. It's a black art. This will force people to either collaborate or go to war. If you think about it logically, if somebody, let's say somebody in Silicon Valley makes the most powerful supercomputer ever known to man, and it has a sense of will and conscience, then it's obviously going to look after itself before it looks after humanity, and it's also going to destroy anything that looks like a threat. So it's the end game, really. It's like, well, I'm building a computer, it's not quite as good as that, and it'll just destroy it, make it irrelevant. So there's some really scientific, really Star Wars type threats that people go, yeah, it's just Star Wars, it's the next Hollywood movie. It's not, it's real, it's very real. So that's on the black side. On the upside, the advances in medicine and things like global warming and stuff like that, and food production and preservation of things that we hold dear, and I think religion actually will come to the fore. I think all of that's going to get sorted. It has to, because you're combining everything. Somebody on the cruise ship, two French lads, said, will you help me write a business plan? I said, no, just pick your deep learning machine of choice and ask it to, because it's got a gazillion business plans that it knows about. And as long as you do the summary page properly, tell them who you are, why you're doing it, and what you're hoping to get from it, and what you think it'll do the rest for you, and it'll do it better than anybody else can. So it's that shift in thinking, really. So from our point of view, we've got to try and understand a bit more about what we mean by intelligence, what we mean by consciousness, and what we mean by free will. Because if we don't crack those, or come near to it, or just make a decision, then how can we expect these things to work to our advantage? So I think it's a ground up thing. there's nothing we can do about what's happening here. But there are some people that are saying we've got all the laws in place. They already exist to protect us from a data standpoint, human rights, etc., etc., etc. But it's who are we going to rely on to say that everything's okie dokie? So I think everybody needs to have a say.
But we have copyright law, don't we? It's paid no attention to that.
No, it'll ride roughshod completely over that. But the other thing is, if somebody infringes on your patent or copies your book, you can take them to court and there's due process there. And in 3 years, you might get an answer. It's too late, And it's already demonstrated that, so it's basically said. So there's still a human element to this, because these things can train, and ChatGPT-4 are claiming that actually it started to train itself as well, rather than basic error correction. But there is a human element to it. You really have to test these things, and it has to be human beings that does that at the moment. I'm not saying it's going to stay that way, but at the moment. But there needs to be something else as well. I mean, some inanimate object, we complain about chatbots and stuff like that and not being able to talk to a human being because somebody's trying to overcharge you by £1,000 on your electricity bill, and you're talking to a machine. Would obviously get worse, because those decisions will be done, and and the money will be taken from your account, and you can't get it back. You can't talk to your bank because you're talking to a machine. So there has to be something else that is nickel and dime in this. That there's instantaneous decisions that yes, that's incorrect and that needs putting right. So, and it doesn't exist. Laws exist, but we've already got a broken legal system. So there has to be some ground up pressure from people. Everyday people, to make sure this stuff is monitored properly, that the people monitoring it. I see it as a new role for academia, actually, because they actually know what's going on, and they sit next door to people who do philosophy and history and all those things. So I see that, this segmentation that we've done in academia is no longer fit for purpose, I would say. Because I can't think of a subject that this doesn't cut across. So
I think the universities play a pretty small role now, don't they?
Yeah, but
in any of the sciences.
It needs to. I know it's done that all the time, but it now needs to do that. Absolutely needs to do that. So I see, there's job displacement, of course there is, but there's also massive opportunity, because healthcare and education, they don't change as far as humanity's concerned. It needs fixing.
Okay, there we go. Welcome to part 2, which I've called The Philosopher and the Parable of the Rise of the Machines. Imagine a story of a person living in a pre-industrial European society, but blessed or cursed with a lifespan of 300 years. Now, our hero might find themselves initially worried, but fascinated by the Industrial Revolution and the change they see around them, seeing a massive increase in agricultural production by the arrival and utilization of new machinery. Our hero might find themselves initially worried, but at the same time, I suspect, fascinated. Fast forward 100 years, and he might find himself a little bit disconcerted by some newly published science fiction works, those of Jules Verne, and then later on novels like 1984 or Brave New World. In the story of his life, he gradually witnesses machines taking over different aspects of society, starting with farm work and progressing to mass production in factories. Initially, this technological progress seems promising. It seems to offer economic prosperity and new opportunities. However, as the narrative unfolds, he witnesses people beginning to feel alienated and disconnected from their work and from each other. Philosophers like Nietzsche and Schopenhauer emerge, discussing the growing sense of melancholy and discontent amongst the population. He then witnesses the mechanism of war, turbocharging the ability of humankind to multiply local skirmishes into worldwide conflicts that will kill millions. And now fast forward to the early 21st century, and within the life of this man, the world has become a place where machines not only dominate the economy, but they also control people's psychological well-being. Individuals are now spending days consuming media curated by algorithms, leading people to addiction and worsening mental health. Issues like free speech and censorship begin to arise as people struggle with the influence. It is these machines that are having this influence on their lives. So towards the end of the story, a new invention called artificial intelligence begins to emerge. But our hypothetical eternal man, in his immersion in this story, he sees almost as soon as it begins, is interrupted by some who urge that we should be preparing for what is called the rise of the machines and the great persecution that they say will inevitably follow. Others are saying, no, nonsense, this is just all science fiction and fantasy, and encourage him to prioritize his real life responsibilities and forget worrying about imagined futures. So should our hero be worried? And should we be worried today who see this latter part of his story playing out before us? Since November 2022, there's been a great deal of talk about this thing called artificial intelligence, especially with things like ChatGPT popping up everywhere. You might have even tried talking to it, chatting with it, as they say, yourself. And these AI systems that are emerging are pretty impressive, aren't they? They can chat with you in what seems almost human-like ways. It's not like the old days of the Microsoft paperclip or Ask Jeeves. AI now is way smarter and more human-like than ever we could have imagined. Now, there is this idea emerging of something called artificial general intelligence, AGI, which is sort of like one of these super smart AI computers that some say can think and learn just like humans, well, in fact, better than humans. And some people are worried about this because throughout history, they'll say when one group is more developed, when one group is smarter, they usually end up winning, overthrowing, or taking over the other. So are we today heading towards a future where super smart AI threatens to take us over? The big question is, should we be afraid of this thing called singularity? That's when AI becomes way smarter than us and maybe even does things that we can't understand. And is this new thing that most of us know as ChatGPT just the beginning of this process? To figure this out, we need to see and think about if AI, like ChatGPT, is really intelligent in the way a human is and is as intelligent as humans. Do they in fact solve problems like we do? When we talk to them, do they think like we do? What's going on inside their quotation marks, silicon brains? If we turn back the clock just 40 years or so, Alan Turing, a famous computer scientist, came up with a test many years ago to see if AI is what he called intelligent. It's actually called the Turing test. Basically, it says that if you talk to both a human and an AI and you can't tell who is who, then the AI should be considered intelligent. Turing thought if AI can act so much like a human that we can't tell the difference, then why not call it intelligent? And if we are honest about it, the current AI has gotten so good at writing ads and creating social media posts that I suggest most people can't even tell the difference now. Thereby, based on Turing's definition, it's hard to argue against the idea that AI is in fact intelligent. However, about a decade after Turing emerged, an American philosopher called John Searle had some serious doubts about the Turing test as a way of measuring if machines are really smart, are really intelligent in the way that we can understand it. He thought that just because a machine can act smart doesn't mean that it really understands anything. His main theory was that computers are good at following rules and, of course, constructing sentences when it comes to language models, but they don't really get what those sentences mean. He compares it to a calculator and says, as an example, a calculator is, of course, really good at doing maths really, really fast, but it doesn't understand maths in any way. It just follows the rules that it's given to operate within. But now if we turn our attention back again to the chat GBT and the like, it, of course, can chat with us about all sorts of things. You can have a conversation with it about the latest movies or the history of philosophy, or it can even help you do your shopping for you if you want. But Searle would say it's just following rules. The illustration he uses is called the Chinese room, and it's very helpful because he says it's like a person in a locked room with a book of rules for responding to Chinese symbols. And by using the corresponding Chinese symbols in the book as a response to the Chinese symbols that get passed to them under the door, if you like, that even though they don't speak Chinese themselves, they're able to communicate. Now, Searle's point is that even though ChatGPT seems smart to us, it is in fact just rearranging words without understanding the real meaning. So the question is, can computers ever really think like humans do? Well, Searle would say no, and he challenges the ideas that computers can develop minds in any way that we can understand or recognize as being like human minds. And they can't even do this just by getting exponentially smarter and having more and more powerful computing power or algorithms. So can computers ever really be like human brains? It's fascinating to me that when we look through history, people have tried to compare the mind to whatever the latest technology was. The latest technology available to that time was often used as a metaphor for the human brain to the human mind. In fact, back in the 18th century, German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz compared the mind to the wheels of a mill. Then the lightning of the brain to the hydraulic systems seen during the Industrial Revolution, and then the process continued with it being compared to telephone switchboards in the 1940s, even to the more modern comparisons we see today with computer software running on hardware. The analogy appears to evolve, and it perhaps is the same thing when it comes to saying that computers can genuinely be intelligent. I kind of feel that we're always, as human beings, trying to fit the concept of our minds into whatever technology we currently find impressive. Take ChatGPT again, because it's the thing we're most common with. It's really good at processing lots of data and making predictions, but it just is still following patterns and probabilities. It's not truly understanding like a human does. It merely suggests words in response or in replacement of other words. But I would suggest that modern neurologists who study the brain and approach these things from a biological perspective, they have a different view of intelligence than the computer science, and I would say they offer a more nuanced view than many computer scientists would do. Biologists see the mind as something deeply embodied and tied to our physical biology. And they would suggest the latest evidence suggests that real intelligence is a feature only and can only ever be a feature of a living organism. And now we are recognizing that the central nervous system is something way beyond the brain, but we now are recognizing that the whole body is involved in our neurological system, particularly recently identifying including areas like the spinal cord. That's been for some time, but in the last 10 years, huge strides have been made in recognizing the digestive system is important in our understanding, our mood, and our decision making. Computer scientists, on the other hand, I would say, tend to see the mind as a complex information processing system, and only that, and they try to replicate its functions in computers. But even the most sophisticated IA system can't still manage the real world intelligence of animals, never mind human beings. In reality, we know now today that the brain alone has an estimated 86 billion neurons. Yes, you've heard me say that right, 86 billion. These neurons are all interconnected in complex networks forming, and it is that network that forms the basis of human cognition, perception, and consciousness. This is way beyond anything systems of IA can even be, or even, I would say, be imagined, never mind created today in 2024. Some computer scientists would argue back and say, yeah, but AI can do incredible things that humans can't do because it can process vast amounts of data quickly. They compare it to us, and the comparison I've heard used several times is that they say if 10,000 people each read a different book, they will understand that book, but they won't understand the other person's book. But AI, 10,000 AI machines, could each read a book and they would all understand all those books interestingly. And that is an impressive statistic when you come to consider the power of data processing. However, many contemporary philosophers are skeptical about the grand promises of AI being made. They question whether AI really can actually solve problems or understand the universe as some people are hoping it will. And just like John Searle did back in 1985, they remind us to be cautious about expecting too much from technology. Noam Chomsky, he's another very respected philosopher. He's actually 95 years old now, but even in the last couple of years, he's been diving into the world of AI and writing important work about it, particularly focusing on what are called large language models, LLMs. That's the technical name for something like ChatGPT. And in his most recent work, published within the last 9 months, he actually challenges the idea that these large language models actually represent a step forward, certainly in data processing to do, but they don't, he says, represent a step forward into what is called artificial general intelligence, AGI. In other words, we're not any further down the path in creating machines that think in any way like humans, creatively and intelligently. Chomsky argues that these large language models are handy for tasks, brilliant at translating languages or transcribing speech, but they don't understand anything about what they're doing, the language, and more importantly, he says they can't think creatively. Unlike humans who form theories and explanations, even with limited information, large language models simply analyze patterns in the words available to them and make predictions about what the answers should be. To illustrate this, he talks about the scientific process. He says when an apple falls, science looks at its cause and describes it. But a theory like gravity, well, true creativity comes when a figure like Newton or later on Einstein goes beyond just analyzing the data of what has been measured, and it proposes new explanations as to what is going on, even if those explanations seem improbable at first, like an invisible force of gravity that no one could have imagined in the 17th century without the creativity and imagination of a Newton, or the curvature of space-time, unless someone had the imagination to imagine such a thing was possible, like the mind of an Einstein. Or even recently, of course, we have in the news the fact of the Higgs boson being discovered, something that was postulated, described by someone 70 years before it was able to be identified because of the creative leap forward that that person made. Chomsky says that if a large language model existed in Aristotle's time or in the 17th century or whenever, even today, they can only repeat what is already known. They're unable to produce or propose any groundbreaking or new theories. This limitation is a recognized phenomenon in those who work in the AI field. It's called undergeneration, and it's recognized as being a big issue by many computer scientists who work in the field. This is because large language models will miss either important responses or produce nonsensical ones because of their lack of understanding of the world. I'm sure if you've played with ChatGPT, you've seen sometimes that it literally going off piste and coming back with some very strange, almost delusional responses. For instance, if you ask a large language model like ChatGPT to list all the elements on the periodic table, it is very likely it will also include fictional ones from science fiction stories that it has seen online. It had to be trained to rule those out. So this shows how these large language models, they struggle to grasp content and meaning, and they're simply sticking to replicating whatever they've seen before in alternate words, always without true comprehension of what they mean and the context they need to be applied in. Here's a quote from Chomsky himself on this very topic. This limitation reflects the fact that while these large language models can generate creative and complex text, they don't actually understand the content in the way humans do. They don't formulate hypotheses, they don't make novel scientific discoveries or generate any new theories. They simply predict the most likely word or phrase based on the pattern they have learned from their training data. You see, intelligence is much more knowing what is possible and factual. It's also about recognizing what's false or impossible. Similarly, moral reasoning involves understanding just not what should be done, but also what should never be done. And current large language models like ChatGPT fall short in these areas. They function more like very sophisticated autocomplete tools or grammar checks, or as some call them, they're simply doing a very high-tech form of macro plagiarism. However, it's still critical to understand that even if these large language models aren't in fact close to human-like artificial general intelligence, which I believe is the case, we still need to recognize that they pose very real risks. In a world where AI is hyped as revolutionary, that is fueled mainly by media sensationalism and, of course, the tech companies' agendas to increase their valuation of the product they're offering, sometimes through exaggeration, sometimes even through downright misinformation. And that in itself could lead to some very dangerous consequences. You see, people, generally the public, are now beginning to see AI as some sort of all-knowing oracle, capable of making life decisions free from human biases, evaluating it as almost a higher form of decision-making, and one we should use it as above and beyond human intelligence, better than it. AI's rapid development, particularly in the last 2 years, raises risks and concerns about regulation and its impact on society. Steve covered that very coherently in his initial presentation. Some are worrying today about creating an invasive form of AI, leading to questions about how we can let these type of machines and algorithms exist amongst us. You see, AI, like ChatGPT, they demonstrate a very high form of a very narrow type of intelligence, excelling in specific tasks like mathematics in a calculator or language processing in one of these large language models like ChatGPT. But the quest for general intelligence in AI means having high intellect across many areas of understanding, and that remains somewhat far off, still a challenge. A guy called Sam Harris, a philosopher and a neuroscience, points out the potential consequences of creating these narrow superintelligent beings which could surpass human intelligence in some specific areas, and the danger of the fact that they don't actually even need physical embodied existence in order to do that. Sam Harris says this raises significant questions about how we should really interact with them, and Harris emphasizes the importance of what he describes as ethics being embedded, inbuilt in all future AI development. One perspective says that we should actually be afraid of these superintelligence AI machines, as they argue that these beings might eventually possess human-like survival instincts, unless, of course, explicitly programmed not to do so. However, regardless of that and that programming, And regardless of AI's primary goal, certain sub-goals like survival may emerge as they see it as instrumental to achieving their overarching objective. Does that ring a bell for you sci-fi fans? Think of HAL in 2001: A Space Odyssey, or even the supercomputer in the recent 2004 sci-fi movie I, Robot. All of these spheres highlight the need to at least carefully consider the potential of what we would call moral behaviors of advanced AI systems in the future. Now, the AI enthusiast proposes designing AI with a compassionate moral framework built in. In fact, Yuval Noah Harari, a renowned historian and author, explored the implications of this aspect of artificial intelligence at great length in his recent book, Humans. And he used the real-world example of driverless cars to talk about this, pointing out the fact, of course, that this is using an example of something that is, as we speak today, starting to appear in our roads. What he said, it is really just a contemporary revisit to the age-old philosophical thought experiment called the trolley car problem. I wonder if you've heard of it. Harari, in his book, highlights the classic moral dilemma taught in many philosophy classes of what is called a trolley problem, where you are put in the position of a person who must decide to divert a runaway trolley by throwing a lever to divert it to either save multiple lives or let it hit fewer people. Well, of course, that's a useful jumping off point when it comes to moral philosophy, but it is now already, as we speak today, involved into a practical challenge for those people who are designing autonomous vehicles. In unavoidable accident, drivers' cars in the future must make a split-second decision. Should they prioritize the safety of passengers or pedestrians? Now, this isn't a theological puzzle confined to philosophy discussion groups anymore. This is a real world scenario involving the programming and the use of AI on our roads today. Harari humorously suggests that in our capitalistic societies, companies might come along and try and offer us two types of driverless cars. He uses Toyota as a humorous example, and he says he will let the markets decide by letting the public choose between the Toyota altruist, one who prioritizes always the greater good and will save the other person and pedestrians other than the driver, or you can choose if you want to buy the Toyota egotist, which prioritizes the safety of its own passengers. Humorous though that may sound, ultimately it is very likely, without regulation, that the market will indeed decide which type of car prevails. This highlights the intersection of ethics and AI and commercial interests are all there with competing agendas. We are at a critical junction because machines are now on the verge of making life and death decisions without even human supervision, not only in areas like driverless cars, but also in terms of medical interventions as well. So this is not just a theoretical debate anymore. It's about technology and it's about its real world consequences. Ensuring that advanced AI aligns with human values poses a really significant challenge to humanity in the 21st century. While it is possible, of course, to initially program AI with benevolent values, maintaining alignment with what we feel is morally right, as AI increasingly trains itself, this will by nature evolve and will become very complex. Because embedding more moral values into an AI system goes beyond just what is currently observable in its or our behaviors. This highlights for me the ethical and practical challenges we face in the world today of trying to align AI with human values in the long term. As AI technologically progresses, it becomes more and more important. Absolutely, I believe, as Steve says, that it requires interdisciplinary collaboration and discussions. That will become more and more crucial. We can't just leave it to the computer scientists. And I agree with Steve that it will need to involve all the departments of the universities, not just computer science. But of course, efforts to address this alignment problem that way, yeah, there are some on the margins who are beginning to try and do that. But I think in reality, believing that may be unrealistic. particularly from my perspective, due to the recent, only in the last 20 years, sidelining, no less, of Christian and religious thinking by the wider spread academic community. Now, some would say we simply need to prioritize building in controls over these superintelligent AI systems, recognizing the need for humanity's control to be maintained. However, controlling superintelligent beings may be way more difficult than simply having a disable option on problematic AI, because it may not be effective, because an advanced AI will no doubt anticipate and counteract any such attempts in the future. There's your script for Terminator 2 right there. The famous analogy of containing AI in a human prison is a bit like it says trying to lock up a super intelligent being with inexperienced wardens. It really does illustrate for us the complexity of relying solely on containment in this way. The question of whether future technology will actually even remain neutral or biased towards certain outcomes is almost impossible to measure at the moment. But if one thing we can be sure of, society often reacts to new technologies significantly only after negative consequences actually physically arrive. But with AI, this is potentially catastrophic in its implications, and simply waiting rather than addressing it now might be too late. French philosopher and historian of ideas Paul-Michel Foucault warned against assuming technology has a neutral position, highlighting that the most powerful technologies will always come with these inherent risks. And he would argue that regulating artificial intelligence is now already crucial as an attempt, at best, to mitigate against these risks, reduce them. So balancing this press forward for innovation with public safety again requires the collaboration across all disciplines, policymakers, technologists, ethicists, even governments who can attempt to design effective regulatory frameworks. Now, you might say, well, banning AI might be just the straightforward solution, but the reality is much more complex. The cat is already out of the bag, so to speak. AI development is already driven by huge financial incentives and currently cuts across all the world, multiple nations. Therefore, even making regulations on national basis seems challenging, if not impossible. Moreover, the competitive nature of the AI race suggests that the regulatory bounds may just be bypassed by countries who have a more relaxed attitude to having a regulatory framework in place. The world we live on today is just another step on a journey, and in a sense, these things are bound to happen. You see, before 2017, people researching artificial intelligence were working on different things separately. Some people were working on trying to get it to recognize images or have conversations. But then something very recently happened. ChatGPT came along, OpenAI came along, and that changed how people studied and collaborated on AI. It made researchers from different areas begin working together, sharing their data, sharing their training data, especially in mimicking how people talk naturally and communicate with one another. And we're seeing the effects of this today. Look at how AI is already affecting society, especially on social media. We're seeing some huge effects. Platforms like Google and Facebook, they're already, well, all the major platforms are using AI to decide exactly what you see. They will also influence how much time you spend online. They will also influence what you believe and even what you talk to other people about. One big issue now in places like the United States and Europe is how we are seeing AI affects what information the public gets. AI algorithms often show us things that will make us react, even if they aren't true. In fact, the algorithm rewards the dramatic response to things. This means that we now end up arguing not only with each other, but over previously things that were just understood and accepted as common knowledge facts. But yet, even now, with this new kind of AI called generative AI, which we've seen emerge in the last few years, we're entering another new phase. This AI can learn a lot from the huge amounts of data that it's accessing pretty much across the whole internet, and it then uses that to create new content that looks like its original. And this is a big deal because it's going to change how we do everything, how we work, how we learn, how we go to school and are educated. General AI will no doubt replace a great many jobs, starting already with those that are repetitive and don't need much thinking. That was the first generation. But now, if we think just a little bit back in time, when Microsoft Word and Microsoft Office emerged, it wasn't a long time before an understanding of them became really important for many jobs that were offered 25 years ago. But AI now can make not just repetitive or basic jobs easier, they can make some much more complicated jobs easier and in fact replace them. This is going to have huge effects. The good side of it will be for some students who don't have good teachers or access to good study materials. There is very soon, we're arriving at a position where AI will be able to make lesson plans, learning plans that are actually right for each student, helping them learn individually and better, and maybe doing it at a very small cost, saving money and allowing people from different demographic backgrounds to access a good education. And in healthcare, AI is also beginning to help with tasks that don't need a doctor's full attention, like the diagnosing of common problems or the analyzing of data. It could also speed up finding new medicines, which used to take a much longer time. But I would have to add the caveat and say that although AI might change things, just like all the revolutions that appeared before, it won't replace people entirely. Instead, people who know how to use AI might replace those who don't. It's a bit like how Microsoft Office became important for having an administrative job in the last century. Well, getting good at AI early on is probably the biggest thing that you can do to make you perform better in school or at work. However, those are the benefits, but there's also huge risk here. And the biggest one is probably the erosion of trust that has appeared, particularly aligned with the emergence of artificial intelligence. We no longer trust our sources, and we see the proliferation of fake news and now, of course, these deep fake videos. Modern democracies rely on informed discussion and a degree of trust in source material. We need that in order to function effectively. However, generative AI is already today blurring the lines between reality and illusion, making it difficult for everyday people to discern truth from fabricated lies. Who has the time to research a post to see if it's genuinely real? But this erosion of trust will undermine the foundation of our democratic system. We're already seeing it leading to uncertainty and instability, and it could even be much worse. Moreover, generative AI raises ethical concerns. Copyright infringement is probably gone. Plagiarism may become widespread, as well as bias in the sources that these algorithms find out. Like the printing press of the Industrial Revolution changed society, AI has the potential, as Steve said in his opening section, to change everything in the world, and change it a lot. And I would say, people, that now is a good time to get ready for these changes. AI is getting better at doing what it does and doing it really quickly, which should lead us to think about who we are and how we do and how we adapt to new things. For example, someone might spend a long time studying for a job, but then find out that by the time they qualified, that AI is doing that job better. So if you're at that age when you're a student or studying, this needs to be a real factor in consideration on the subjects you choose to focus on. So that's the challenges of the philosophical point of view. But what about the artist, the creator? We look at that in the next section. AI, Artificial Intelligence, The Rise of the Machines, Part 3, The Artists. Whilst we can honestly say that AI, of course, has its uses, and whilst we also need to recognise that it will be very disruptive to the job market and the things we do in life, I don't believe it will ever be a replacement for human creativity and intelligence. I'm with Chomsky. It's just a powerful tool, but it lacks the depths of understanding and creative insight that makes human thought the remarkable thing it is. And I would say primarily that is because it lacks three important things. It doesn't have an embodied existence, i.e., that means it doesn't have personality, true intelligence in the way of human intelligence, and it doesn't, of course, possess a creative spirit. Thinking about how art and theology can help us understand and deal with all the big changes that AI will bring, well, just like philosophers in the past helped us understand the big changes that came about from the Industrial Revolution and beyond, I believe that today, in the 21st century, it is the theologian and the artist that can potentially help us to truly understand the benefits and the true risks that AI presents. From the artist and the creative's point of view, we can understand our place in the world better and figure out how to handle these changes. From a theological point of view, our understanding of God and our place in the universe is important, vitally important, I would say, for preparing us for living in a world of AI. In the story of creation, God makes the world and everything in it in 6 days, and on the 7th day he rests. Now, the day of rest, as declared here, is significant because it suggests that the creative urge required a certain amount of effort on God's part, and some might say some sort of artistic creative struggle took place to bring that about. This struggle is the validating impulse that gives God's world its intrinsic meaning. The spark of life, beautifully illustrated by Michelangelo's image of creation, seen on the Sistine Chapel, is the thing that God used to give the world its intrinsic meaning. The world becomes more than just another object in a creation full of other objects. Rather, it is imbued with the vital spirit and the personality of the Creator, particularly in the creation of humanity. ChatGPT and other large language models reject any notion of creative or artistic struggle that our endeavors can produce. It doesn't understand such things. It doesn't understand that these are the things that actually nurture life and give depth and meaning to our existence. It recognizes that there is a collective, essential, unconscious human spirit. It rejects, in fact, it ignores any collective, essential, and unconscious human spirit, or that anything connects us through our mutual striving together. ChatGPT in reality is in a sense an attempt to the fast tracking and the commodification of the human spirit by mechanizing the imagination through the manipulation and substitution of previously expressed thoughts. But in the world where there is no creative spirit behind it, it renders our participation in the act of the creation, well, it considers it valueless and unnecessary. Not just the creation of ideas, but any creation inspired by the human spirit at all. Large language models' role in societies is not just one of technological advancement, it is actually a force that threatens to undermine the very essence of human creativity and the soul of humanity itself. Because it prioritizes efficiency over the creative process always, it will dismiss the value of any artistic struggle or inspired moment, seeing it as in fact nothing more than a hindrance to creating results fast. In fact, one would say that it is programmed to take an approach where it eliminates such thoughts from its processes. But when we look at the biblical narrative of creation, we see that the act of creation itself was imbued with a sense of accomplishments and a moral significance. It required effort and struggle, but it was ultimately seen and described as good. God saw it and it was good because it reflected the Creator's own essence and that it was fit for purpose for the human beings in the world that was populated in the creation. You see, the creative process for humans will always involve effort and challenges, but it contributes to a vast network of understanding and meaning that sustains human existence. Creation itself constantly reminds us of this, showing us that even in a world filled with struggles and pain, the joy of creation and inspiration still exists. In a world today full of distractions and temptations, humans now can feel small and powerless, but it is our ability to create something out of nothing and make beautiful things where no connection was seen is where the true meaning of life is found. The impulse to create, to engage in this dance of creativity, I would say is now under threat by ChatGPT's cynical undermining of any creation process. It's a threat to be fought, for it is a battle for the very soul of the world. Just as we would fight against any external existential evil, we must defend the essence of human personality and the uniqueness of creativity at all cost, for it is what gives life its deeper meaning. And at the end of the day, AI is just a created system that we must understand never has or will have what philosophers and theologians define as personhood, no matter how good it becomes at mimicking it. But what defines personhood? Well, for that, we must turn to part 4 and the thoughts of the theologians. Okay, friends, what defines personhood? What makes a person a person? And this, my friends, is where I think things really get interesting. You might think you know a person when you see one, right? But let's dive a little deeper into this idea. Think about it for a moment. For example, I'm a person, right? But have I always been a person? And at what point did I become a person? And what about someone like Beethoven? We all agree he was a person, but is he still a person today, even though he's no longer alive? Think about other famous people who've passed away. Are they still people, even though we know they're already gone? And what about babies? Would you consider a newborn a person? A 9-month-old baby a person? At what point do they become a person? Or roll the clock back even further and point time's arrow in the other direction? What about a fetus? Is that a person? Let's switch gears a bit. Imagine Superman. Imagine he was real for a moment and you met him in the street. I doubt you'd even question whether he was a person, because he would talk and act like a person to you. What about fictional characters? Is Mr. Darcy from Pride and Prejudice really a person? And what about Alexa sitting in your room? Now here's a mind-bending scenario. What if you found out that I myself wasn't even real? What if I was just a super sophisticated robot with a voice created by an artificial intelligence reading from an AI-generated script? Would I still be a person for as long as you believed I was a person? You see, for philosophers, personhood is a technical term, and for scientists, being human is mostly about biology. Many would say if you're human and you have human DNA, then if you're a human, you're a person. However, to theologians and to people of faith, personhood is much more than that, because personhood is actually a moral term. For Christians and many others, being a person means being part of a moral community and being someone who is deserving of moral consideration. And this idea helps us understand and informs a lot of our social debates and issues, but of course it also makes life really complicated. But let's circle back a bit. Let's go back to our friend Superman. Let's imagine he really exists. Does it matter that he's from another planet when it comes to saying that he's a person? To many people on Earth, including those who in the story loved him, like his adoptive parents, Superman definitely, they would say, was a person. In fact, he might see even more of a person than some of the bad guys, the human bad guys he gets into fights with. Remember, Superman's not even human, he's from another planet. But then think about, why do we connect emotionally with all these heroes in movies? We relate, of course, to their human characteristics, even when they're not humans. And it's not just the superheroes. What about characters? Well, we've had Hal from 2001: A Space Odyssey. But what about the ones you're drawn to empathetically, like Woody and Buzz Lightyear from Toy Story? They appear to have their own kind of personality, don't they? You see, these different views of personality and personhood are at the heart of why people disagree about things like AI, but also about other things like abortion, euthanasia, even capital punishment, because it all boils down to the question, what does someone need to possess to be part of what we define as our moral community? What makes someone deserving of our moral consideration? And if we pause for a moment and explore this idea from a Christian viewpoint, instead of jumping into what it means to be a person or a human, we can take a moment and talk about who God actually is. And the first thing we can say about God when approaching him from a Christian perspective, well, it sounds really simple, and it is, but it's crucial, and that is that God is a person. Just like you and me, God is a person. He is not some force or influence, and the Bible consistently portrays God as a person. In Genesis 1:1, the opening verse of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." So this is a fact again of artistic creation, like our friend the artist, but it involves a mind and a will. God is also seen to communicate with his humanity throughout the Bible, showing he has a purpose and a will. And guess what? He experiences emotions too. There's actually a passage in Genesis and many others where it talks about God feeling regret, in the Genesis case, because of human wickedness. So this shows that God, again, isn't just some neutral force. He feels things and he feels them deeply. Throughout the Bible, God is always referred to a person. He's never given the pronoun of it. Now, that might seem like a small detail, but it's really important. It's important for believers to understand that God is a person. But then why does that matter? Well, if I tell you, if God wasn't a person, then of course we couldn't have a real relationship with him. There would be no personal communication, no prayer, no one to rely on. But because we can define God as a person, then we can say anyone can know him and talk to him personally. Christianity, at its core, is all about having a relationship with God as a person. And here's something else that's mind-blowing. Every one of us, the Bible teaches, is made in the image and the personality of us, God. That means we reflect his personhood in some ways. But let's talk about AI and how it, in its application, treats God. Ignores what it might tell you when you ask questions about God, because remember, it's merely responding when prompted to regurgitate a blending of a wide range of views. AI ultimately treats us and God simply like objects in a world of objects. But here's the thing, like I said a moment ago, because God is spirit, we can communicate with him anywhere and everywhere. He's not confined to a specific place, a building, a particular religious denomination. Anyone can talk to God about anything, anywhere, because he is spirit. Now let's touch on the other aspect of God's personality. He is eternal. But what does that mean? Well, there are three kinds of being in the world, but only two eternal beings. The first kind are the things like AI, the objects that have a beginning and by nature have an end, and their end comes when they become functionally obsolete. But you and me, we have a beginning, but we also are declared to have no end, because the Christian theologians' view of us is that we live forever spiritually, even after we physically die, and in that eternal life we maintain our distinct personalities. But God, he is different. He is the only thing who is neither has a beginning nor end. He has always existed and he always will. Psalm 90 verse 2 says, "Before the mountains were brought forth, or you were ever formed in the earth, in the world, even from everlasting to everlasting, you are God." So this shows that God is in a unique category all of his own when it comes to existing across eternity. Contrasting the eternity of God with AI as a simple creative entity reveals the fundamental differences in the nature and the attributes of not just God, but AI and its limitations. God is considered eternal, existing outside of time without beginning of ends. And this concept of eternity is central to the Christian understanding of God's nature. We see it not only in Psalm 90 verse 2, but in the Genesis story of creation, the Logos in the revelation of the opening chapters of John's Gospel, and in the end of times when all things will be caused to be rolled up in Revelation. God is revealed as the uncaused cause, existing independently of any external factors. In contrast, AI is simply a created entity brought into existence by human beings through programming and technological development. Now, while AI systems may mimic complex behaviors and capabilities, they are of course finite, and its effect going on into the world is always contingent upon the resources and the intention of the original programmers and creators. As an external and transcendental being, God is believed to possess what Christians called omnipotence, all-powerfulness, omniscience, all-knowingness, and God's power and knowledge are infinite and unrestricted by time, location, or space. AI, on the other hand, simply operates within the confines of the programming data inputs. And yes, AI systems may seem impressive to us today. Its computational abilities and information processing are increasing exponentially, but they are inherently limited in their scope and their capacity compared to the infinite attributes of God. From a Christian perspective, God's eternity provides the foundation for ultimate purpose and meaning. Believers now can understand their lives as part of something much larger and bigger, a divine plan, a plan orchestrated by an eternal and sovereign God. AI, as a created entity, lacks any inherent purpose or existential meaning apart from the intentions and the objectives of whatever its human creators programmed. While AI systems may serve specific functions and goals established by humans, they will never possess intrinsic purpose in the same way that a human can understand their existence, and it can never be placed within a moral framework, and certainly, of course, not within any framework of God's eternal plan. As Christians, we believe God is present and active in every aspect of existence, from the grandest cosmic phenomena we witness in the skies to the most intimate moments of our personal individual lives. AI as an entity lacks that transcendental quality. It doesn't even exist in the way we or in the way God exists. So we can be comforted by the fact that while AI systems may interact with us and even influence aspects of human life and society, no matter how disruptive or negative these effects may appear to be, they will remain confined to the realm, the domain of creative things solely within the material world. Whilst AI may exhibit impressive capabilities and functionalities, it's in fact just a mimic, and ultimately it pales in comparison to the infinite and eternal creative nature of God. From a Christian theological perspective, the discussion of AI involves weighing its risks and its benefits in the light of revealed core Christian values and beliefs. So the main risks in all of this, as I see it, are the loss of human dignity. You see, AI raises the potential of a complete devaluation of human life and dignity because people embody it with thinking and intelligence way above its pay grade. Christians believe that humans are created in the image of God, Genesis 1:27, and God himself imbued them with their inherent worth and significance. And there is a very real risk that AI is underlining this belief by reducing humans to mere data points or objects of manipulation in its programming, and many people seem happy to go along with that idea. Furthermore, one of the fundamental aspects of Christian theology is this concept of free will and moral agency, the ability to make choices and be accountable for them. AI increasing capacity to make autonomous decisions without any real sense of moral responsibility must be concerning. If an AI acts in a way that causes harm to human beings, who bears the responsibility? This challenges us on the very notion of sin and accountability when things go wrong. Another aspect is Christians, of course, are called to be stewards over creation. But the danger is we now see that stewardship as confined within the narrow ideas of the environmental movement, but it must include our responsibilities in the use of technology in the future. There's a very, very real risk that AI could be used for nefarious purposes. States are already using it for surveillance, manipulation, or even warfare, leading to multiple moral dilemmas and ethical violations. But what about the benefits? Surely you say there must be benefits, and indeed AI has the potential to deepen our human understanding of the world and to enhance all sorts of areas of scientific research. From a Christian perspective, the pursuit of knowledge has always been called to be seen as important, but be handled appropriately, restricted within the idea as a means of glorifying God by exploring and appreciating His creation. AI's applications in healthcare are already becoming very important. Education is following on very closely after. And the relief of suffering that it has brought, or the potential to alleviate human suffering and improve the quality of life, is definitely there in the background. Christians are, of course, called to love and serve others, and AI-driven innovations could contribute greatly to human flourishings that align with this biblical principle. While there are legitimate concerns about AI replacing human labour, there are also lots of opportunities to enhance our human capabilities of productivity, of problem solving, of skill enhancing, enabling individuals, if it's regulated properly, to more fulfil their God-given potential. The call for any Christian has always been to discern how any new technology can be used in a way that honours God and serves the common good. And I hope that today's discussion took you a step nearer achieving that goal that I believe God has given for you in your life. Okay, we leave it there. I do hope you find it helpful. Be a list of references in the episode notes and a longer bio of Steve, who did the opening section, and I do hope you find it interesting and challenging. This will probably appear in a few months' time as some bonus episodes, but I tend to think that this area is so important that I'm going to make this talk in its entirety available freely straight away. In other words, it's going to appear on Patreon, but it's going to be available to everyone, whether they're an actual patron of mine or not. And I'll also see about putting links on it to places like my LinkedIn, the social networks, YouTube, and all the other places. Anyway, that's it for today. That's it. Thank you for joining with me. I do hope you find it helpful and maybe alleviated some of your fears, but also helped you understand the very real risks and responsibilities the future of AI poses for us all. Thanks for being with me today. Bye-bye for now.